The river of change. Why every moment with someone is a first and last time. Emma stared at the man sitting across from her at dinner, wondering when he had become a stranger. This was David, the same David she had fallen in love with 3 years ago, the same David she had moved in with, planned a future with, and thought she knew better than anyone else in the world. Yet tonight, as he spoke about his new business venture with an excitement she hadn't seen in months, she realized she was looking at someone completely different from the person she had woken up next to that morning. What Emma was experiencing, without knowing it, was the profound truth that the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus warned about 25 centuries ago. You never step into the same river twice because it's not the same river, and you're not the same person. Heraclitus understood something about human nature that most people spend their entire lives never realizing. Everything is in constant flux. The person you fell in love with 6 months ago, last year, or even yesterday no longer exists in exactly the same form. They have been changed by every conversation, every experience, every moment of joy and pain since you first met them. More unsettling still, you are not the same person who fell in love with them. The Emma who was enchanted by David's quiet confidence 3 years ago was a different woman than the Emma sitting across from him tonight, wondering why that same confidence now felt like emotional distance. This constant state of change explains why so many relationships feel like they're slowly dying, even when nothing obviously wrong has happened. Partners look at each other and feel like they're living with strangers, not because anyone has betrayed or abandoned the relationship, but because the people they originally fell in love with have evolved into different versions of themselves. The love that once felt perfect and eternal was actually love for specific configurations of personality, circumstance, and emotional state that no longer exist and can never be recreated. Have you ever looked at someone you've been with for years and felt like you were seeing them for the first time? Not in a romantic way, but in a way that made you question whether you actually know them at all. Heraclitus taught that change is the only constant in the universe, and this principle applies most dramatically to human relationships. The passionate, adventurous woman David fell in love with had evolved into someone more contemplative and security-focused through 3 years of career challenges and personal growth. The ambitious, optimistic man Emma was attracted to had developed deeper emotional complexity and occasional melancholy as he faced the realities of adult responsibility. Neither had become worse or better. They had simply become different, as all living things must. The tragic beauty of Heraclitus's insight is that it reveals why relationships require constant conscious choice rather than relying on initial compatibility or past connection. Emma and David were trying to sustain their relationship based on love for versions of each other that no longer existed, while remaining largely unconscious of who they had each become. They were living together as strangers because they had never learned to continuously discover and choose each other as they evolved. Most people approach relationships as if they were static contracts between fixed personalities. I love you as you are, and you love me as I am, and we will maintain this mutual appreciation indefinitely. But Heraclitus understood that this approach is built on an illusion. There is no fixed you or me to love. There are only temporary configurations of thoughts, emotions, values, and dreams that are constantly shifting and evolving in response to life's experiences. Emma's growing dissatisfaction with David wasn't really about David at all. It was about her unconscious attachment to a version of him that had existed only briefly and could never return. She missed his spontaneity from their early dating days, not recognizing that his current thoughtfulness represented growth rather than loss. She wanted him to surprise her like he used to, without acknowledging that she herself had become less receptive to surprises as her own priorities and emotional needs had evolved. Heraclitus would say that Emma was suffering from what philosophers call temporal displacement, trying to live in a relationship with past versions of themselves and each other instead of engaging with the reality of who they had become. This creates a peculiar form of loneliness, where you can be intimate with someone while simultaneously feeling completely disconnected from them, because the intimacy is with ghosts of former selves rather than present reality. David experienced the same temporal displacement from his perspective. He missed Emma's early enthusiasm for his ambitions, not understanding that her current realism represented maturity rather than diminished support. He interpreted her need for deeper conversation as criticism of his communication style, when it actually reflected her evolution toward greater emotional sophistication. They were both mourning the loss of relationships with people who no longer existed, while failing to discover who they had become. When you think about your longest relationship, can you identify specific moments when you realized your partner had fundamentally changed, and how did you respond to discovering this new version of them? The wisdom of Heraclitus suggests that successful relationships require what philosophers call continuous consent, the ongoing choice to love and commit to someone as they are now, not as they were when you first fell in love with them. This is far more challenging than initial attraction, because it requires releasing attachment to past versions of someone while developing appreciation for their current evolution, even when that evolution includes qualities you didn't choose or expect. Emma and David's relationship began to transform when they stopped trying to recreate their early dynamic and started getting curious about who they had each become. Instead of lamenting David's lost spontaneity, Emma began appreciating his developed wisdom and stability. Instead of missing Emma's initial enthusiasm, David began valuing her evolved emotional depth and realistic perspective. They had to learn to fall in love again, not with improved versions of their past selves, but with the completely different people they had grown into. This process of continuous rediscovery requires what Heraclitus called listening to the logos, paying attention to the underlying patterns and principles that govern change, rather than resisting change itself. Emma learned to see David's evolution as natural and necessary, rather than as a loss of qualities she had valued. David learned to appreciate Emma's growth as expansion, rather than abandonment of characteristics he had found attractive. The philosopher's insight reveals why so many people experience serial disappointment in relationships. They fall in love with temporary configurations of personality and circumstance, then feel betrayed when those configurations inevitably change. They switch partners seeking someone who will remain static and predictable, not understanding that such stasis is impossible for any living, growing human being. Heraclitus understood that embracing change requires a fundamental shift in how we conceptualize love itself. Instead of loving someone for specific qualities they possess, we must learn to love the process of their becoming, their capacity for growth, evolution, and continuous transformation. This kind of love is both more challenging and more sustainable, because it's based on reality rather than illusion. Emma's breakthrough came when she realized she had been trying to love a memory rather than a person. The David sitting across from her at dinner wasn't a deteriorated version of the man she had fallen in love with. He was a completely new person who deserved to be discovered and appreciated on his own terms. This shift in perspective transformed her experience from disappointment about lost qualities to curiosity about emerging ones. David experienced a similar revelation when he stopped comparing current Emma to past Emma and started paying attention to who she was becoming. Her evolved seriousness wasn't a loss of fun, it was the development of depth. Her changed priorities weren't rejection of their shared dreams. They were the natural evolution of someone who had learned and grown through experience. The ancient philosopher's warning about constant change applies not only to who we are, but to what we need from relationships. The emotional needs, communication styles, and life goals that brought Emma and David together had evolved along with their personalities. They had to learn to meet each other's current needs, rather than continuing to address needs that no longer existed or trying to recreate dynamics that were no longer relevant. Have you ever tried to solve current relationship problems using approaches that worked in the past, only to find that the same strategies no longer seem effective with the same person? Heraclitus taught that wisdom comes from accepting the fundamental impermanence of all things, while learning to find beauty and meaning within that constant flux. Applied to relationships, this means releasing the security of knowing someone completely while developing the capacity to be continuously surprised, challenged, and delighted by their ongoing evolution. Emma and David learned to practice what philosophers call beginner's mind, approaching each conversation, each conflict, and each moment of connection as if they were meeting for the first time. This didn't mean ignoring their history or shared experiences, but rather holding that history lightly while remaining open to discovering new aspects of each other that hadn't existed before. The transformation of their relationship from stagnant familiarity to dynamic discovery required daily conscious choice. Each morning, they had to choose to love the people they were becoming rather than clinging to the people they had been. Each conflict became an opportunity to meet each other's evolved perspectives rather than trying to resolve disagreements based on outdated assumptions about each other's motivations and needs. Heraclitus's insight about constant change also reveals why relationship advice that worked for past versions of ourselves often fails with current realities. The communication strategies that resolved conflicts during their first year together became ineffective as Emma and David developed different emotional processing styles and life priorities. They had to continuously evolve their approaches to intimacy, conflict resolution, and shared decision-making as they themselves evolved. The philosopher's warning extends beyond romantic relationships to friendships, family dynamics, and professional relationships. The friend who was a perfect companion during your college years may become a stranger as you both evolve different values and interests. The family member you felt closest to in childhood may become difficult to connect with as you develop incompatible worldviews and life approaches. This isn't failure or betrayal, it's the natural consequence of growth and change. Subscribe to this channel if you want to learn how to build relationships that thrive on change rather than being destroyed by it. Like this video if you believe that true love means choosing someone new every day rather than trying to preserve past versions of who they were. Share this with someone who needs to understand that relationship dissatisfaction might be caused by loving ghosts instead of living people. Understanding Heraclitus's principle of constant change offers both profound challenge and tremendous hope for relationships. The challenge is releasing attachment to past versions of people we love while learning to appreciate their continuous evolution. The hope is that relationships built on this understanding become increasingly rich and surprising rather than gradually stagnating through familiarity. Emma and David's relationship became stronger, not despite their changes, but because of their changes. By learning to love each other's evolution, rather than mourning their past selves, they developed a dynamic that could accommodate any future growth and transformation. They stopped trying to preserve their relationship in amber and started allowing it to flow like Heraclitus's river, constantly moving, constantly changing, constantly becoming something new. The ancient philosopher's wisdom suggests that the people we think we know best are actually the people we're most likely to stop seeing clearly. Familiarity creates the illusion of knowledge while blinding us to the subtle but constant transformations happening right in front of us. The couple that has been together for 20 years is actually composed of dozens of different versions of themselves who have loved, challenged, and discovered each other throughout multiple cycles of growth and change. Heraclitus would say that the secret to lasting love is learning to fall in love again and again with the same person as they continuously become someone new. This requires the courage to release attachment to past versions while developing appreciation for current evolution, even when that evolution includes unexpected or challenging qualities. The river metaphor reveals why trying to recreate past relationship dynamics is doomed to failure. You cannot step into the same river twice because the water has moved on, and you cannot love the same person twice because both of you have moved on. The only choice is to love the person who exists now, with all their current complexity, growth, and evolution, or to remain attached to memories that grow increasingly distant from reality. Emma and David learned that accepting constant change doesn't make relationships less secure, it makes them more authentic. Security comes not from knowing exactly who someone is and will always be, but from trusting that you can continue to discover and choose each other, regardless of how you both evolve. This kind of security is based on adaptability and commitment to growth rather than static predictability. The philosopher's insight offers a radical reframe for relationship conflicts and disappointments. Instead of seeing your partner's changes as betrayals of who they used to be. You can see them as invitations to discover who they're becoming. Instead of fighting to preserve past dynamics that no longer fit, you can work together to create new approaches that serve your evolved selves. Heraclitus' warning about never stepping into the same river twice ultimately reveals that every moment with someone is both a first time and a last time. It's the first time you've ever met this exact version of them, and it's the last time this exact version will exist. This perspective transforms ordinary moments into precious opportunities for discovery and connection with someone who is simultaneously familiar and completely new. Your own relationship struggles may be caused by trying to love past versions of people instead of discovering who they've become. The dissatisfaction, disconnection, and disappointment you feel might not indicate relationship failure, but rather the need to release old assumptions and develop fresh appreciation for ongoing evolution. The ancient philosopher's wisdom suggests that the deepest love comes from embracing, rather than resisting, the fundamental impermanence of all things. When you stop trying to preserve relationships in static form and start flowing with their natural evolution, you discover that change itself becomes the source of continuous renewal, surprise, and deepening connection, rather than the enemy of lasting love.